compartments was the 6 ways of making great amounts of merit. The Buddha said, you make a great amount of merit by offering food to the Sangha. The way you offer food to the Sangha is very important what you do with your mind. If you prepare the food with a happy mind, give the food with a happy mind, and reflect on the good deed that you did with a happy mind, then you're starting to fulfill the proper way of giving. Some people, they say, oh, this monk isn't very good and we don't want to feed him. We only want to feed good monks. But that's really the wrong kind of spirit and attitude to take. Every monk is a representative of the entire Sangha. When you give food, you don't give to an individual. In your mind, you want to give to the entire Sangha with the Buddha at his head. If you do that, you gain the biggest amount of merit. People that sit in judgment and judge harshly about, oh, this monk isn't good, he breaks rules, he's not a good monk, he doesn't know very much. That kind of attitude, what it causes is it doesn't allow for any growth to happen with that monk. It's like you have a set mind that he's that way and he's always going to be that way, and you, in your mind, you're being very rigid and stiff. One of my teachers was a monk in Sri Lanka, and he was traveling around to one of the monasteries, and he was invited to eat, and one of the monks there was exceptionally rude. He would call for things. Come, quick, put food on my plate. And he was very, very rude. And my teacher, after the meal, he started talking to the other monks, and they said, why don't you work with this monk? And they said, we have. He's a lot better than he used to be. So you can't really judge what a good monk is and what a good monk isn't, because we're all growing. We're all learning how to let go of attachments, and none of us start from the same place. So by focusing your mind when you're giving food to the Sangha, you focus your mind on giving to the whole Sangha, and you have a mind that's full of happiness and reverence. You're giving the proper way. Now, you might notice that monks don't really thank you for giving. If a monk thanks you, that makes it a personal gift to him, and you don't get as much merit. So monks, they say, sadhu, well done. They're happy because they see you're making merit, and they rejoice with you, and that's the way you get the most merit. In the Bible, Jesus one time was talking about people that are criticizing all the time. Oh, you're not as good as you're not as pure as you think you are, that sort of thing. And basically what he said was, why are you looking at the splinter in my eye and criticizing me when you have a log in your own? People that criticize other people are really hurting themselves a lot. They're not only hurting themselves, but they're hurting everybody around them. When you keep the precepts, it's real important to be careful with what you say. If you're not real careful with the things that you say, they will come back at you and cause you many problems. So a good rule of thumb is, if it's not nice, don't say it. That's one of the good rules to go by. So that's the first way of getting a huge amount of merit, by giving to the Sangha. And then the Buddha said, and you make more merit still by building a monastery. You get a huge amount of merit by building a monastery. The good that comes back to you from doing that is almost immeasurable. I saw in one book, in a commentary, they talked about how many times that would come back to you. And it's 10 with 14 zeros behind it. That's how many lifetimes that good act of building a monastery will come back to you. So it's a lot of merit. Then the Buddha said, you get more merit still by taking the refuges in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. There's a lot of different ways of looking at taking the refuges. You can look at the Buddha, and he's the teacher. He's the one that came up with this system. And that's one thing to really respect a lot. And you can also look at it like the Buddha represents a happy, pure, free mind. Sadhu. The Buddha represents enlightenment, and that is a potential that we all can have. We all can have the possibility of enlightenment if we're willing to work for it. Taking refuge in the Dhamma means following the way of true harmony. It means being in complete agreement with the nature of existence. It means seeing the true nature of everything. When we'll go back to critical speech, when you don't practice right speech, when you criticize someone else, you're causing a disharmony in your own mind. And that causes attachments, and that causes pain, and that causes dukkha at some point in the future. To be in complete harmony means to watch what comes out of your mouth more closely and not just let words fall out, but be conscious of what you're saying while you're saying it. That's being in harmony. Being in harmony with the nature of the way things are is easy to say and difficult to do. But it takes practice. And there's a lot of different ways that the Buddha taught that we can do it. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Taking refuge in the Sangha, but it means not only taking refuge in the monks, it means being on the path of liberation with all of your friends too. We're all part of the Sangha. There's an Arya Sangha, and there's the monk Sangha, and then there's the whole Sangha. That's everybody included. Every time you can be in communion with what's happening, you're being part of the Sangha. When you see the way the universe works, it means that you see the true nature of everything around you. You see things are impermanent. You see there's a dissatisfaction because of that impermanence. And you see that there's nothing substantial about it. It's only an arising and a passing away of different kinds of phenomena. When you practice being in harmony with the universe, it means that you are real mindful of thinking consciousness when it arises. You're mindful of your attachments. You see how easily mind can be drawn towards negative mental states, and you don't identify with them. That's being in harmony with the universe. There's a definition of the universe that's different than what most people think. The American Indians were very incredibly strong religious people, very spiritual people. And they called the universe, they said it's the one song. And what that means is, anytime you identify with thoughts and feelings and emotions and that sort of thing, that means there's two happening at that time. There's me, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry, whatever it happens to be, and there's everybody else. That's not universe. Universe means one. It means being in harmony with what's happening without identifying it, just seeing it as an arising and passing away of a process. So that's one of the ways of gaining a lot of merit, is taking the refuges in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. There's a lot of other ways that you can look at that, but I think I'll go on from there. The Buddha said, also, you make more merit than taking the refuges. You make more merit by taking and keeping the precepts. That means 5 precepts and occasionally 8 precepts. There's different ways of looking at the precepts. Everybody, they're used to looking at it, the first precept is not to kill. But the first precept really is to respect life. And if you respect life, you're not going to kill it. And it doesn't only mean animals. How many of the forests in this country itself have been torn down because of the greedy nature of people? It means being in harmony with nature. The next precept, not stealing. That means respecting other people's property. You know how badly you feel if somebody takes something from you that you like. Put yourself in their shoes. Respect them. The next precept is not having wrong sexual encounters. And that means not causing any other being pain or suffering by having a sexual relation with them. I've already talked about the fourth precept, about speech, a little bit, but it's worth repeating to be careful with your speech. If you're careful with your speech, then you affect your world harmoniously and you affect the world in a positive way. If somebody does something you don't like, that doesn't mean you have to tell everybody else that you didn't like what they did and what they did was wrong. It means let it go. The fifth precept is not to take any drugs or alcohol. And that basically means don't dull your mind with substances like this. If you dull your mind, you're going to not be in the present moment. When you're not in the present moment, that's when you become very attached. It's very difficult to see clearly when you have a mind that's dull from either drugs or alcohol. Now, there's no God up there that's going to throw down a lightning bolt because you break a precept. The reason you keep the precepts is so you don't have any guilt feelings arise. It's a way of purifying your mind. When you purify your mind that way, your mind will become tranquil very easily. It's very easy to develop good, strong concentration, not only when you're sitting in meditation, but when you're doing your work. If you have a job, let's say you're washing dishes, and you break the precepts, whichever one, and then your mind starts thinking about it, wishing you wouldn't have done that. That's the time that you break glasses, you break dishes, you drop things, you cut yourself. That's the time that kind of thing happens. So you really help yourself by keeping the precepts. And there's nobody that's going to sit over you and judge you. You can judge yourself. There's a story in Jataka Tales about one time the Bodhisattva was taking he went to Nalanda College and he was studying the books. And his teacher had a daughter that was very beautiful, and she was at marrying age. And the teacher was trying to figure out which one of his students would make the best husband for her. So the teacher came up with this idea. He said to all of his students, what I want you to do is I want you to go out and steal a piece of jewelry without anybody else knowing, and then bring it back here. So all of the students, of course, they were kind of anxious to do this because she was a beautiful woman. And all of a sudden this jewelry starting to appear all the time. And everybody but the Bodhisattva brought in a piece of jewelry. And the teacher thought that was rather strange. And he asked the Bodhisattva, why? And the Bodhisattva said, well, you said the requirement was that nobody else would know that we had to steal this, but I would know. And there's not a person in the world that could fulfill that. And it impressed the teacher so much that he gave his daughter to the Bodhisattva. It's not impossible to overcome the guilt feelings that arise from breaking the precepts, but it takes a lot of work. It takes doing a lot of dana and facing the fact that, yes, you broke a precept. Sometimes if you killed an animal, it helps to relieve your mind to go buy an animal that would be killed and let it go free. That can help overcome your remorse and guilt. If you took something from someone else and they're no longer around, you can practice generosity with people in need. There's many ways that you can overcome these guilt feelings, but it's certainly easier not to do them than have them come up. So keeping the precepts is a form of mental discipline. You say, it's only sila. It's only morality. That's all keeping the precepts is. But when you get right down to it, the whole spiritual path that the Buddha is teaching is developing morality. You attain Nibbana the first time, you lose doubt. You lose belief in wrong thinking of rites and rituals. You attain Nibbana the second time, you weaken lust and hatred, defilements of the mind, immorality of the mind. You attain the third step of Nibbana, and you finally let go of that immorality of lust and hatred. So what you're doing in Arahat, one definition of an Arahat is somebody that has pure sila, completely pure. He doesn't have any defilements of mind come up anymore. And that's the best sila you can get. That's why we're working for it. So it's not only the base of Buddhism. Sila is the final goal of Buddhism. Perfect sila is the goal. That's why the Buddha, when he started talking about all these great ways of making merit, it's so high on the list. It's really amazing. It's a mental discipline that will help you in all ways, in any time of stress. I don't know if you've ever been around anybody that's been in an accident. Say they fall down and they break their leg. And then some people, they see it happen and they run to them, and the first thing they do is they grab onto their leg and try to move it around and cause the person incredible pain because their mind is so flustered it doesn't know what the right thing to do is. But a person that practices sila, his mind is not anxious and upset by it. He goes, he sees what the proper thing to do is at the time, which make the person comfortable, get him to the hospital and get it fixed, or call an ambulance, whatever is proper at the time, without becoming overly upset by it. This happened to me one time when I was a layman. I was working as a waiter. And in America they have ashtrays on all the tables. And somebody picked up an ashtray and there was a live cigarette in it. And they threw it in with paper. And a fire started. There was 5 or 6 people working in the restaurant at that time. I was working at that time too. And everybody, they started seeing smoke and they started running around yelling, "Fire! Fire! Fire! Fire!" And wow, there's a fire. I see some smoke. And I went, yeah, that's a fire. And I got a pitcher of water and put it out. That's the difference between following Sila and not following Sila. It helps you with your regular life. It helps you in times of stress to see what the proper action is to overcome a problem. That's one of the reasons why it's so high on the list of making good merit. Now there's another thing that the Buddha said of making merit, and he said, if you have one thought moment of loving kindness, it's more merit than all of the rest put together. One thought moment. That's quick. I mean, that's a million thought moments. So you don't have, that's not much. That's how powerful metta is. And there's a lot of different ways that you can practice metta. A lot of people think, oh, practicing metta means you have to sit in meditation. That's one way. Watching your speech is another way of practicing metta. Saying kind, gentle, and useful things to people is a big practice of metta. It's very helpful to other people, to encourage them, to help them by using loving speech. You also practice metta by trying to remember to be more conscious of your thoughts. And that doesn't mean sitting in meditation, that means during your regular day. If you see negative thoughts come up, like, oh, you're at work, and someone comes to you and they're angry, and they start yelling at you, what does your mind do? The first thing your mind does, gets angry back. And after that happens, you don't like the fact that your mind got angry, and you try to push that anger away. And you start fighting with yourself. You're taken completely out of the present moment, and you're believing that all of these mental states that arise are you. I'm angry. This person had no right to make me feel this bad. But if you practice loving kindness during the day, when this sort of thing arises, instead of focusing on what the person is telling you when they're emotional and upset, you focus your mind on loving kindness, and you radiate loving kindness into the situation. And the way you do that is you don't pay attention to what they say. You say in your own mind, loving kindness is guiding and protecting me. Loving kindness is guiding and protecting you. And you say that, and you radiate that warm feeling of loving kindness into the situation. When you focus your mind on loving kindness, it doesn't have a chance to get angry. Your mind stays balanced, and as a result, you stay happy. One thing that happens when you have angry thoughts arise, this is the way it works. First, there's a craving. You want something to be in a particular way. Then, it's not that way. So, you see this person coming, and you want them to be loving and kind to you, and they're not. next thing that happens is your mind becomes frustrated, upset. And it keeps getting bigger until finally anger comes up and it boils over and you talk back roughly. And then the situation stops. Then your mind starts playing with, I was right to be angry. Then your mind starts playing with, I was right to be angry, and it gets real self-righteous. Then pride steps in and even makes it worse. And this happens not only right after the situation, you don't like it, so you try to push it away and forget about it, ignore it, let yourself do something else. And a half an hour later, it's just like somebody had a tape recorder and they played that whole thing again. The craving was there, the dissatisfaction was there, the frustration is there, the anger is there, the self-righteousness is there, and you keep on identifying more strongly and more strongly with all of these mental states. And then you start thinking, well, I'm a spiritual person. I'm not supposed to have these thoughts. These thoughts shouldn't be here. Pushing away, pushing away. And it goes away for a little while and then comes back again, just like it was on a tape recorder. Same words exactly, same feelings come up exactly. And it happens over and over and over again until finally your mind thinks the best thing to do is just forget it. That way I can forget these bad thoughts and these bad feelings and they won't bother me anymore. But it doesn't work that way. You've created yourself a big problem. It's a karmic problem of having these thoughts come up, identifying so strongly with these, and then trying to push them away. All of these negative mental states. So, it might not come up in exactly the same way, but you keep yourself open for that situation to come up again. And it'll come up. That's the nature of existence. Anything that we're attached to will come back. Anything that we identify with so strongly will happen again. So what to do? If you can remember to start putting loving kindness into the situation, that changes the whole situation. The incredible amount of good merit that you make from focusing on loving kindness changes the situation for the better. It changes the situation so it becomes acceptable. And even though the person can still be angry and talking with you very roughly, you don't take it personally anymore. You think, oh, he's just having a bad day. And you can forgive him then. In the Jataka tales, another story, the Bodhisattva was just a little baby. And the queen, he was born into the royal family, and his mother was a queen and his father was a king. And the queen was playing with the little Bodhisattva when the king called her, and she didn't pay any attention to him, and he got angry. And he decided that what he was going to do was cut off the boy's hands and feet. So he called the executioner in. And the Bodhisattva, even though he was very young, he was very, very spiritually advanced, saw that this was going to be happening. He saw that this was a situation that was completely difficult. And the only thing that he could think to do was put loving kindness into the situation. he saw that there was the four different kinds of beings. There was himself, his mother, who he loved a lot, somebody that he was neutral to, the executioner, and his father, who was his enemy. He started focusing on loving kindness to all the four kinds of beings, over and over again, while the executioner chopped off his hands. He didn't cry. He kept focusing on loving kindness. His father became even more angry, cut off the feet, made the Bodhisattva even more determined to keep his mind focused on loving kindness. Finally, the king said, "I'll just cut off his head, kill it." So the executioner did that. The Bodhisattva was immediately reborn in the heavenly realms. It was a difficult situation for him to be in. There was a lot of confusion happening at that time. There was a lot of dislike that was happening at the time, but he kept his own mind balanced. And as a result, the good karma of keeping his mind pure and focused on loving kindness made his rebirth a happy rebirth. That's a strong amount of good merit. And it's something that every one of us can practice at any time. Anytime there's a situation where your mind becomes negative, like your mind gets caught in depression. Instead of just letting your mind stay depressed, start focusing your mind on loving kindness. Loving kindness is guiding and protecting me right now. And focus on that a few times. There's one thing about loving kindness that you can't do. And that's you can't demand that it works in a particular way. It works in the way that is best. It works in the way that is best for you at the time. Now, a situation that I was in just in this rains retreat, I went to Thailand and I was with a European monk who was very much against the kind of meditation that I've been practicing for 15 years. I mean, he was very strongly against it. Anytime we started to discuss it, excitement would come up, hard feelings would start to come up. It was not a good situation to be in. So what I started recognizing was how much this caused me suffering, because I have attachment to doing my practice the way I've been doing it. I find it successful for me. So whenever the talk would get around to the kind of meditation that I'm used to, and this other monk would start to get a little excited, I started focusing on loving kindness. Loving kindness is in this situation right now. And I started radiating that loving kindness into the situation. Sometimes the loving kindness seems like it didn't work right at the time that I wanted it to, but it did work eventually. Sometimes the loving kindness would cause a space that felt very pleasant, nice to be around. And we would sit, because it was during the rains and it was very rainy where I was, we would sit and listen to the rain, and it was very pleasant. There wasn't any hard feelings towards him by me, and there was no feelings, hard feelings for me from the other monk. We agreed with each other that it was pleasant just to be there and be in each other's company quietly. Other times, it was the proper thing to do was to get up and leave. It wasn't leaving with a hard feeling. It was, I think I want to go write, or I want to go meditate, or I just have something I would rather be doing right now. But what would happen is if that anger would have come up, would have been, okay, I'm going to leave now. I don't want to be around you because you're not being the way I want you to be. And all the way back to my kuti, I would have been thinking about how difficult this other monk was to be around, and I didn't like it. I would have been completely taken out of the present moment, and my mind would be unhappy. But when I focused on loving kindness, it made it all right for him to disagree with the things that are very dear to me. It made it acceptable. When the Bodhisattva was getting his hands and feet cut off, he was focusing on loving kindness, and it made it acceptable. It made it not a nice thing to have happen, but his mind stayed in harmony and accepted that it was happening without fighting it, without disliking it, without wishing that it was something other than it is. He saw very clearly that the present moment, even though it was a difficult thing to go through, that loving kindness was still guiding and protecting him. It's a very powerful technique. You can do it with every situation that you're in. It doesn't matter whether you're emotionally upset or not. It doesn't matter if everybody else in the room is angry at you. It doesn't matter. Focus your mind on loving kindness, and then watch miracles happen. It's real amazing. Now there's another part to this. It's not only focusing your mind on the situation, letting your mind dwell on loving kindness, but it's also calming your mind down and listening to your intuition. And what that means is your mind, when you focus on loving kindness, your mind is very much in harmony. It's very aware and very alert. And if you listen to that quiet voice inside, the voice of your heart, it's never wrong. It always, at least this is in my experience, it always shows the right thing to do at the right time. It sounds odd. It sounds like that shouldn't work at all. But it does. It really does. It's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. Because you can be in a situation where there's two different kinds of philosophy. I like this philosophy, you like that philosophy, and they don't mix very well. Jesus taught that we should be loving and kind. One of the things that he said was to love your neighbor like you love yourself. Isn't that what the Buddha taught? It takes away those differences and it shows you the Dhamma. Not my Dhamma is right and your Dhamma is wrong. That's two again. That's not being in harmony. Start looking at things with loving kindness in your mind, and you'll find that everybody, without exception, no matter what kind of a person they are, they're all looking for the same thing. And that means they're all looking for loving acceptance. Even people criminals, their mind is very warped, granted. But loving kindness is something that overcomes that. I mean, look at what it did for Angulimala. Here's a man that killed almost 1,000 other people. Loving kindness and loving acceptance that the Buddha gave him was so powerful that it changed him. And it can change any situation. Not always in the way that you think it should. You can't put demands on it. If you have someone in your family that's dying, and you go to them and you start focusing on loving kindness, wanting them not to die, that's not going to stop them from dying. But don't not practice loving kindness at that time. Do practice loving kindness at that time and see what happens. When I was in America, I used to work with people and be with people as they were dying. And I found that being in the same room with a person, even though they had amazing amounts of pain, when I focused on loving kindness and my mind became calm, their pain became bearable. That's a help right there. That doesn't mean that they're going to be healed. Unless you wonder, you start redefining what healed means. True healing means being in the present moment with loving acceptance. That's real healing. Sometimes I would be in the room with a person that was dying and their family was there. And I'd look at the person that was dying, and the loving kindness didn't seem to help them much. But I look around the room, and everybody else was peaceful and calm. They were accepting of this happening at that time. That's very helpful. You can't demand that loving kindness act in a particular way, because it almost never will. But that doesn't mean not to do it. It means to practice it as much as you can and see what happens next. One thing that we have to realize, everybody wants a formula so that everything can work out exactly the way we want it to. You want me to be able to tell you that if you do loving kindness, your mind is always going to be happy. But life is an experiment. Experiment with loving kindness in your own life and see what makes you the happiest. Practice developing wholesome thoughts, accepting thoughts, and see how it can change your life. You'll start to see miracles happen. A miracle like, you know how sometimes those days will happen where everything you try to do is just difficult. So you stop doing that, you try something else, and that's difficult too. So after doing that for a little while, you start, if you can be awake enough, you start to see how attached you are to the way things to be. You want things to be right, you want things to be easy, always. But they're not. So you start putting a little bit of loving kindness in the situation, and you feel your mood lighten. That's a miracle in itself on a difficult day. Just to have a little bit more of an accepting mind that, yes, this is a difficult day and it's not that bad. I mean, the sun still shines and things like that. You have friends that smile. You can start reflecting on them, and then all of a sudden it's not a difficult day anymore. It's an easy day because you haven't got that attachment. You're more accepting. So when the Buddha was talking about large amounts of merit that you can make, even one thought moment of loving kindness is very, very powerful. It can take a bad day and make it a good day. And that's a miracle in itself. Now the Buddha said also, the way that you make the most merit is by seeing and recognizing the three characteristics of all existence: anicca, dukkha, anatta. Seeing the arising and passing away of all phenomena without identifying that I'm happy, I'm sad. You just see that sometimes there's happiness and sometimes there's sadness. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's difficult. But whatever it happens to be, it's in a state of change. And that change is unsatisfactory. When you see it, when you see everything that way, your mind naturally becomes happy. And I'm not talking about the kind of happiness where you're kind of giddy, laughing, happy. I'm talking about deep down spiritual happiness. The Buddha talked about the aggregates that make up the mind and body process. And he said that these are forms of attachment that we have to give up. We have to give up the belief that these aggregates are us. And it's like a real good concept and it sounds great, but what does it mean? When you're talking about the six sense doors, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, thinking, feeling, if we say seeing, in order for there to be sight, there has to be a good functioning eye. That's body. That's one of the aggregates. And there has to be color and form. That's perception. That's one of the aggregates. Now, when the color and form hits the eye, then seeing consciousness arises. That's consciousness. That's one of the aggregates. Now, what the Buddha taught was, if you want to overcome craving, as soon as the seeing consciousness arises, you make a mental note. You place your awareness on the fact that you're seeing, on that consciousness. After you make the mental note, then there's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling that arises. Either the sight is a pleasant sight, it's an unpleasant sight, or it's neutral. That's feeling. Now, if you make a mental note right after the consciousness arises, then after feeling, there is no craving that will arise. There can still be thoughts arise, but they're not the thoughts that have to do with craving. They're not the thoughts of, I really like this sight. It's wonderful. I wonder how I can keep that here. And then you start thinking about other things. That wanting to hold on, that craving, causes your mind to go further and further away from the present moment. But when you make a mental note right after that consciousness arises, then there's still pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling that comes up, but this time no craving arises and your mind is completely alert. It's very, very bright, and it's receptive to whatever comes up next. Your mind is completely in the present moment. When you're able to note that way, there's a deep relief that happens. And it's a difficult one to explain, but it's there. Another way of doing it, let's talk about taste. In order for there to be taste, you have to have a tongue. You have to have an object of taste, food. The food has to touch the tongue, and then taste consciousness arises. Then you make a mental note, tasting. Then it's a pleasant taste, unpleasant taste, or neutral taste. So let's say you're eating a mango. Okay, you know you have a tongue, and you put the mango on the tip of your tongue and taste arises. And you make a mental note, tasting, and you keep your attention on the tasting. You don't let your mind just wander off and think of other things. You keep your mind on taste. And right after that, there's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling about that taste. The mango is ripe, it's a good taste. It's a pleasant feeling. If it's not ripe, or if it's overripe, then it's an unpleasant taste. Or if it's real green, it doesn't have much taste, it's just neutral. But let's say that it's a very pleasant taste. It's just the perfect mango. If you don't make the mental note of tasting when that taste conscious arises, your mind thinks, this is a great mango. I wonder what the next taste is going to be like. You know, I had a mango like that last week, and it was really good too. I wonder if it's from the same tree. And you start thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking, and you're out of the present moment completely, and you're not tasting it anymore. But when you make the mental note that you're tasting, as the taste arises, and you see the pleasantness of that taste, your mind has a moment of freedom from craving. And it's like, boy, isn't that nice? And then you take another bite, and you go through the whole process again. And the more times you can string those kind of moments together, the more deep spiritual happiness happens. And that's vipassana. That's seeing the arising and passing away of all phenomena as it happens without being attached, without any craving. And the Buddha said, when you see things in that way, that's the highest amount of merit you can make. There's no attachments. There's no should-bes, should be good, should be bad. There's no liking and there's no disliking. There's only the present moment arising and passing away. And that deep spiritual happiness, when you can string enough of those moments together, creates such good karma that eventually Nibbana will happen. It takes practice.